Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Remember how the word myocarditis just seemed to explode into everyone's vocabulary during the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. It felt like it came out of nowhere for many people.
Right. But the thing is, heart inflammation, myocarditis, it's got this whole history long before COVID-19. It's much more complicated than just the headlines we saw.
Definitely. A much longer and more complex story.
So today, that's what we're doing. A deep dive into myocarditis. We'll get into what it actually is, look at the global trends over the last, say, 30 years, how the pandemic really changed things, and really importantly, the latest on vaccine safety.
Yeah.
Our mission here really is to take all these sources you've given us, CDC, FDA, big global health studies, and just boil them down. Find the key facts, the surprising bits, so you get a clear picture without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Exactly. And looking at this range of sources gives us that broader view. We can see the long-term trends, not just the immediate crisis points. It helps understand the full context.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's start at the beginning, before COVID. What is myocarditis, fundamentally?
Right. So at its simplest, it's inflammation of the heart muscle, the myocardium.
A muscle itself, and then there's pericarditis.
Correct. That's inflammation of the pericardium, which is the sac or lining around the heart. Related, but technically different conditions.
Got it. Now, you mentioned, or the sources mentioned, symptoms can feel like a cold or the flu, even pneumonia. That sounds, really tricky to pin down.
It absolutely can be, which is why diagnosis can be challenging, differentiating it from other heart issues or even those common infections.
So how do doctors figure it out? Is there a definitive test?
Well, the historical gold standard has been a myocardial biopsy, actually taking a tiny sample of the heart muscle.
Wow, that sounds invasive.
It is. So thankfully, current guidelines also lean on things like cardiac MRI, magnetic resonance imaging,
Okay.
and checking for elevated troponin levels in the blood. Troponin is a protein released when there's heart muscle damage.
Right, those markers.
Exactly. So those are less invasive ways to help diagnose it.
And why is getting that diagnosis so important? I mean, if it feels like the flu sometimes.
Well, that's the critical part. While many cases do resolve on their own, myocarditis can be serious. It can lead to complications down the road.
Like what?
Things like cardiomyopathy, where the heart muscle gets weak and enlarged, or even heart failure, and the inflammation can cause scarring.
Scarring on the heart muscle.
Yes. And that scarring can, sometimes years later, disrupt the heart's electrical signals and cause dangerous arrhythmias, irregular heartbeats.
Okay, so definitely not just like the flu then. Serious potential consequences.
Precisely, which highlights the need for accurate diagnosis and follow-up.
So let's look at the scale of this pre-pandemic. What does the global picture look like, say, from 1990 up to 2019?
Yeah, the data suggests roughly 1.8 million cases of myocarditis worldwide each year in that period.
1.8 million annually. Okay.
But here's where it gets perhaps a bit counterintuitive. While the total number of cases globally actually went up quite a bit by over 60% between 1990 and 2019.
60% increase. Wow.
Yeah, from about 780,000 cases to over 1.2 million. But the age-standardized incidence rate, which basically adjusts for changes in population size and age structure.
Okay, so the rate per person, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. That rate actually decreased slightly by about 4.5% over the same time.
Huh. So more people getting it overall, but the risk per person slightly lower.
Exactly. And we see a similar pattern with deaths. The total number of deaths linked to myocarditis increased by about 65%.
Also a big jump.
From around 19,600 to over 32,400. But again, the age-standardized death rate stayed, quote, relatively stable.
That is interesting. What does that suggest? Better treatment, better diagnosis?
It strongly points towards that, yes. It suggests that even as the global population grew and perhaps became more susceptible due to aging or other factors, our ability to detect and manage myocarditis improved over those decades.
So progress, even if the raw numbers were climbing.
You could definitely interpret it that way. Advances in cardiac imaging, maybe more awareness. It likely reflects improvements in healthcare.
And what about demographics? Did it affect everyone equally back then?
No, there were clear differences. The risk both of getting myocarditis and, unfortunately, of dying from it tended to increase with age, especially for people aged 50 and older.
Okay, older adults at higher risk.
And there was also a consistent sex difference. The incidence rate was lower in females compared to males.
So men were more likely to get it.
Yes. The sources suggest this might be linked to the influence of sex hormones, like testosterone possibly playing a role, but that's still an area of research.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned age, but what about the very young?
Ah, yes, that's a really important point. While the incidence wasn't highest in the youngest kids, the impact, measured by something called Daly's Disability Adjusted Life Years.
Right, that measures overall disease burden, lost years of healthy life.
Exactly. That daily rate was notably higher in children under 5. And there's a quite sobering statistic in the sources that somewhere between 16 and 20% of SIDS cases, sudden infant death syndrome, have been linked to myocarditis found during autopsy.
Wow, 16 to 20%.
Yeah.
That really underlines the potential severity, even if it's not the highest number of cases overall in that age group.
It does. It shows a disproportionate impact on the very young.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. A condition present globally, improving management, but still serious, with known risk factors.
Yeah.
Then 2020 happened.
And then 2020 happened, and everything changed.
How did the COVID-19 pandemic hit myocarditis specifically?
Well, the impact was pretty dramatic. Let's look at the U.S. data first. Hospitalizations for myocarditis, they nearly doubled almost immediately.
Doubled.
Yeah. From around 880 in February 2020, just before things really locked down,
Yeah.
to over 1,600 in March, and then over 1,700 in April.
A huge rapid spike.
A massive spike. And it wasn't just the number of cases, it was the severity.
How so?
The in-hospital mortality rate for myocarditis patients in the U.S., which was around 4% before the pandemic, jumped to nearly 17% during the pandemic period studied.
17% from 4. That's huge.
It's a staggering increase. And a really key finding was that about 40% of those myocarditis admissions during the pandemic also had a COVID-19 diagnosis.
So a strong link between having COVID and having myocarditis and much worse outcomes.
The data certainly points very strongly in that direction. The co-infections seem to be a major factor in that increased severity and mortality.
And was this just a U.S. phenomenon, or did we see this elsewhere?
You know, we saw similar patterns internationally. Data from Germany, for instance, also showed a rise in total myocarditis hospitalizations.
Okay.
And specifically between 2020 and 2022, they recorded almost 1,550 patients hospitalized with both COVID-19 and myocarditis. That was nearly 9% of all their myocarditis cases during that time.
Almost 1 in 10 myocarditis cases also had COVID.
Right. And mirroring the U.S. findings, the outcomes were much worse for those patients in Germany, too.
How much worse?
Significantly. The hospital mortality rate for patients with both conditions was over 12.5% compared to just over 2% for myocarditis patients without COVID-19.
Wow. Again, a massive difference.
A huge difference. And those patients with both illnesses more often needed things like mechanical circulatory support, serious interventions, indicating a much tougher disease course.
So across different countries, different healthcare systems, the same story. COVID-19 infection linked to more myocarditis and much more severe, often fatal myocarditis.
The data seems quite consistent on that point.
What are the reasons behind that? Is it just the virus attacking the heart or other factors?
It's likely multifaceted. The virus itself can cause inflammation, yes, but other factors probably contributed to the worse outcomes during the pandemic, too.
Like what?
Well, patients admitted during the pandemic might have been older on average or had more pre-existing conditions, more comorbidities.
Okay.
Plus system-level things, people perhaps delaying seeking care because they were afraid of catching COVID in hospital.
Right, that makes sense.
Or even just the immense strain on hospitals, staff burnout. All these things could have played a role in those poorer outcomes. It's a complex picture.
Definitely complex.
Right.
Okay, this brings us inevitably to the vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccines. Let's shift gears to that critical part of the story.
Right. A very important and often debated topic.
Maybe just quickly level set. How are the mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna different from more traditional vaccines?
Sure. So traditional vaccines often use a weakened or inactivated form of the virus itself, or maybe just pieces of it, to teach your immune system what to fight.
Right.
mRNA vaccines work a bit differently. They deliver a tiny piece of genetic code messenger RNA wrapped in a protective layer. This mRNA tells your own cells to temporarily make a specific protein from the virus, like the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2.
So your body makes the protein, and then your immune system reacts to that protein.
Exactly. Your immune system sees that protein as foreign and builds a defense against it. The key things are there's no live virus involved, and the mRNA itself breaks down very quickly once it's delivered its instructions.
And the advantages were speed of development, adaptability.
Yes. speed, adaptability to new variants, and they proved highly effective, especially against severe disease and hospitalization.
Okay. Now, with any new vaccine technology, safety monitoring is crucial. How does that work, say, in the U.S.?
It's very robust, actually. It's co-managed by the CDC and the FDA using multiple overlapping
Like
systems.
VAERS. I think people heard a lot about VAERS.
Yes, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, is a key one. It's a passive reporting system where anyone can report an event, but importantly, healthcare providers are actually required to report certain adverse events after vaccination.
Required reporting. Okay.
And then there are active surveillance systems too, like vSafe, which was that smartphone-based system where people could directly report how they felt after vaccination day by day. There's also the Vaccine Safety Data Link, VSD, which uses large healthcare organization databases. It's designed to be a wide net.
Casting a wide net. So what has this wide net caught regarding myocarditis and the mRNA vaccines?
Well, it did identify a potential safety signal. And it's important to state up front, information about myocarditis and pericarditis occurring after mRNA COVID-19 vaccination has been officially included in the vaccine information and labeling since June 2021.
So this isn't new breaking news. It's been acknowledged and tracked for years.
Correct. It's been transparently communicated by health authorities.
Is there updated information? What's the latest estimate of the risk?
Yes, there's a very recent FDA update, actually from June 25th, 2025, concerning the labels for the 2023-2024 vaccine formula.
Okay, what does it say?
It estimates the unadjusted incidence, meaning just the raw count, without complex adjustments yet, of myocarditis or pericarditis following that vaccine formula is approximately 8 cases per million doses given.
8 per million doses across most age groups.
That's for individuals aged 6 months to 64 years.
Right, 8 per million.
But it's really crucial to break that down further. The risk isn't uniform across everyone.
Who is at highest risk?
The data consistently points to males aged 12 to 24 years. In that specific group, the estimated incidence is higher, around 27 cases per million doses.
27 per million for adolescent and young adult males.
Yes. And these cases typically occur within a specific time frame, usually within about 7 days after receiving the second dose of the primary mRNA series.
Okay, so a known risk, higher in a specific demographic, typically after the second dose and within a week. That's quite specific information.
It is, which helps clinicians and individuals know what to potentially look for.
Now, what about the longer term? If someone develops this vaccine-associated myocarditis, does it resolve completely?
That's a really important question, and research is ongoing. There is a cardiac MRI study funded and co-authored by the FDA, published last year, September 2024.
Okay, what did it find?
It looked at individuals who had developed myocarditis after an mRNA vaccine and followed them for about 5 months. It found that abnormal findings on cardiac MRI, which can be a sign of myocardial injury or inflammation, were still common at that 5-month mark.
Still common after 5 months. Does that mean permanent damage?
Well, the study did note some improvement over time in those findings, but critically, the report also states that the long-term clinical significance, what those persistent MRI findings actually mean for the person's health prognosis down the line, isn't fully known yet.
So more research needed on the long-term implications.
Absolutely. And to address that directly, the FDA is actually requiring the vaccine manufacturers to conduct ongoing studies specifically looking at the long-term heart health of people who experienced vaccine-associated myocarditis.
Requiring studies. That seems like a necessary step for transparency and understanding.
It is. It's part of that continuous monitoring and learning process.
Were other serious adverse events picked up by these monitoring systems besides myocarditis?
Yes, the systems are designed to detect various rare events. For example, Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, which is a neurological disorder, and thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, TTS, a rare clotting disorder.
And those were linked more to the J&J vaccine, right?
Correct. Findings related primarily to TTS, but also GBS, led to the J&J Janssen vaccine eventually being removed from the market in the U.S., and the Official Advisory Committee, ACIP, recommended the mRNA vaccines instead.
And just to be clear, was an increased risk of GBS found for the mRNA vaccines?
No, the monitoring has not found an increased risk of GDS associated with the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines.
Okay, so the system identified risks with one type of vaccine, acted on it, and confirmed safety regarding that specific risk for another type. That sounds like the safety monitoring working as intended.
That's precisely the goal, to identify potential issues, assess them rigorously, and make adjustments or recommendations based on the evidence.
Now, one thing that comes up is reports of deaths following vaccination. How does VA ears handle death reports,
Right.
and what does the overall data show?
That's a really crucial point to clarify. FDA regulations require that any death occurring after vaccination must be reported to VAers, regardless of whether the vaccine is thought to be the cause.
Any death, even if it's clearly from, say, a car accident the next day.
Yes. Even if the cause seems completely unrelated, it's reported to ensure nothing is missed. But then, thorough investigation happens to determine if there's any actual link.
So a report to VA doesn't equal causation.
Absolutely not. And when you look at the large-scale data, the evidence is very clear. People who received COVID-19 vaccines are significantly less likely to die from COVID-19 and its complications compared to those who are unvaccinated.
Less likely to die from COVID.
Much less likely. And importantly, the data also shows that the vaccines do not increase the risk of death from other causes, non-COVID causes.
Okay, that's a critical distinction based on the actual data analysis, not just raw reports.
Exactly. Data analysis allows for those crucial comparisons and conclusions.
All right, let's try and pull all these threads together then. We've covered a lot of ground. What are the main takeaways for you from this deep dive?
I think there are a few key things. First, myocarditis isn't new, and while total cases were rising pre-pandemic, the age-adjusted rate was actually stable or slightly decreasing, suggesting progress in medicine.
Okay, point one, pre-pandemic progress.
Second, the COVID-19 pandemic itself had a massive impact, dramatically increasing myocarditis hospitalizations and, critically, mortality, especially when someone had both COVID-19 and myocarditis. The virus itself was a significant cardiac risk.
Point two, COVID infection significantly worsened the myocarditis landscape.
And third, yes, myocarditis and pericarditis are rare but recognized side effects of the mRNA vaccines, particularly in younger males after the second dose. But these are actively monitored, the risks are quantified and communicated, and ongoing research is happening.
Point three, vaccine risk is known, monitored, and researched with transparent data available.
Exactly. And underlying all this is the fact that these robust safety systems are continuously working, gathering data, allowing agencies to provide transparent information.
Which allows all of us, individuals and public health bodies, to make informed decisions based on pre-comprehensive data, warts and all.
That's the goal. Informed decisions based on the best available evidence.
Okay, so that leads us to our final thought, something for you, our listener, to chew on. We know that viruses, generally things like influenza, other common coronaviruses, are known causes of myocarditis. And we've just discussed how the COVID-19 virus itself clearly dramatically increased severe myocarditis and related deaths. So considering that broader context, the viral risk versus the known monitored vaccine risk, how does this fuller understanding of myocarditis influence your perspective on the role and perhaps the ongoing importance of vaccination as a tool in public health?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.